as Peter B. Parker from Into the Spider-Verse then. So why would I have done it? So I'm delivering this to you today on Halloween. I hope all of you are wearing equally silly costumes as you are listening to this. And if you're not, please do so now. I would appreciate that. I'll wait. Okay. So today I want to talk about characters. And then we'll talk a little bit about titles and introducing aspects of the story and getting us into a story or a novel. But let's talk about characters first, because all semester long it feels like we built up to character. Like, this is what matters. This is what we care about. We need to get into characters. All semester long, I've been told, I care more about characters than I do plot. I care more about characters than I do about these other aspects. That's fair. So often when we talk about fiction, we talk about character-driven fiction. What we mean by that is this is fiction that is driven by how invested we are in the characters, what the characters are doing, why we care about the characters. So today we're going to talk about how we build characters that people can actually care about. And I think that there are a variety of ways to do this. The book talks about it in some detail. But we've talked about this a little bit during the semester. But every character needs to want something. There has to be something at stake for every character in your story, no matter who they are. Whether they are the protagonist and the person who is driving the action forward, or if there's somebody who's much more minor than that. You should have a sense of who everybody is. I think sometimes we get caught up in our main characters and we sort of lose track of the other characters that are floating around this universe that we're creating. We can't do that. Everybody has to have purpose. Everybody has to have a role to play, and everybody has to want something. It doesn't have to be as prominent. Obviously, you're not going to make a story in which every character is the main character. It didn't work that way. But what you are able to do is have characters that we believe. Because I think that is ultimately the first thing that really matters, right? Is that we have characters that we can believe exist. And this doesn't matter if we're writing a genre fiction. It doesn't matter if we're writing in anything, any kind of style. We should have characters that are plausible and believable. And that's where we start, right? That we need to have characters that act and behave in a way that we can understand. They might not be wholly predictable. There might be things that these characters do that we don't totally understand, but we can buy based on the way that they've been set up the rest of the way. The worst thing that you can do is have a character do something that feels so out of character, that feels such a betrayal of what's been established, that is never justified. Now, people can act out of character. They do this all the time. We do this in real life, and we can have our characters do this in stories. But we've got to justify why. We've got to explain why a given character would act in a given way. That's a thing that we're doing. Now, there are different types of characters, right? We've got round characters and we've got flat characters. And the book talks about this a bit, and I think it's worth getting into. Our main characters, our protagonists, are almost assuredly going to be round characters. Well, what does that mean? A round character is a character who can undergo change, who does undergo change, who is somebody who is influenced by what's going on around and can be changed as a result of the things that happen to them. So this is something that's very important when we're writing, that we want to think about who's round and who isn't. Can we have flat characters that are also interesting? Of course we can. We absolutely can. But you want to make sure that you are weighing things. Remember when I said earlier, and you should remember this because it was literally like a minute and 15 seconds ago, when I said that we can't have a story in which every character is the main character. This is very, very true. And so what that means is that we might have some characters that are depicted as flat within this world. Well, what's an example of a round character? A round character is somebody who changes from the beginning of the end, beginning to the end. Or if they don't change, there's a very good reason why, and they've made the choice to not change. Hamlet is a round character, right? I'm not messing around with my examples this time. We're going straight to Hamlet. Hamlet's a round character. Hamlet is a student at the beginning. He's a grad student. That's why he's so indecisive about everything. But he's a grad student, and he is forced to make decisions as it goes on, and he's terrible at it. That's his fatal flaw, right? Is he can't decide things. But he is still forced to act and forced to do these things, but then he questions all of it. But by the end, he is able to act. He's able to do something. And does that thing leave everyone dead? Pretty much. But he still does it. So this is an arc. This is something that moves. That Hamlet behaves in a certain way at the beginning, behaves in similar ways as it goes on, but he's changing as it goes. He's a round character. He is a character that undergoes change. There are certain characters in that play that aren't, that don't undergo change, don't really do anything. They respond to Hamlet, and they're in his stratosphere, his atmosphere. They're in his world, but they don't necessarily change. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are obvious examples here. They're supporting characters who exist to move the plot along. But even Horatio is kind of like that. He's Hamlet's buddy, and he's a good guy, but he doesn't really change. He doesn't do much as it goes from beginning to end. He's there to serve a role, and certain characters are. It's important for us to remember how important it is to know who our characters are, even if they're flat, even if they aren't functioning necessarily in a very dramatic or significant way. William Faulkner, the great novelist, supposedly had notes and notes and notes about every character, whether it was the main character in a novel, which obviously he would have extensive notes about, or if it was somebody who played a very, very significant minor role, insignificant role, at least to us. He knew everybody. If it was somebody who was taking a ticket so another person could get into a park or the fair or whatever, he knew who that person was. And I'm not necessarily saying that we should take massive, massive notes about every single character we create, but we should know who they are. And it's going to be important in order for us to do that. So yeah, go through these notes about but flat and round characters and think about them and think of what we can learn from that, because that's going to be pretty significant as we go forward. But let's talk a bit about what the book says about things that we can learn from defining character. Now, I'm going to do my best to turn pages in a book, but I've got these hands. These don't come off, so I'm stuck. They also don't shoot webs. What's the point? What a flimsy costume I got here. So the ways we have of defining characters. We can talk all day about how important it is for us to know our characters and understand our characters, but the reader has to too. So even if you have the most amazing notes in the world called about a given character, it doesn't matter if I don't understand them, if I don't get a sense of what it is. So the book provides ways of defining character, and I think they're worthwhile. It starts with the way a character looks, and explaining to us what a character looks like. And a lot of you have done a pretty good job here this semester in your work of creating visuals of your characters, and it's important for us to continue with that. A lot of us probably begin character construction by thinking about what our characters look like, right? I mean, we probably spend time getting into the physical nature of a character before we do much else. That's fine. That's maybe how sometimes we create characters in the first place. Maybe we see somebody out in the world and we want to write a character that is inspired by that person. This is okay. We can do this. If you feel badly about people watching in order to create characters, and I hear some people do, I don't understand it. Because what I do is I'll go out, I'll people watch, I'll observe, I'll go to Walmart. Oh my gosh, Walmart. There are lots of people there. And there are things that we can do this way, but maybe you don't like that. That's fine. Here's a website you can go to. Thispersondoesnotexist.com. I think I'll put a link in the page here. This person does not exist. It will give you an image of a computer-generated person. So it is a person who literally does not exist, but totally looks like they do. Look at some faces, get some ideas for what your characters can look like. It's kind of fun to think about that. Sometimes it's just good practice to generate an image on that and just then describe the person. Try to, even if you're not going to make this person a character in anything, just to spend some time looking at a computer-generated but very real-looking image and write out a physical description and practice, because it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Now, why isn't it easy to physically describe a person? I think this is a situation where we can put ourselves into the perspective of the audience for a second, because sometimes it gets really boring to spend too much time listening or reading a description of what somebody looks like. We get kind of tuned out, especially when it feels like it's detached from the action, because too often writers will do this. Like, here is several paragraphs describing what a character looks like. Now I'm just going to talk about the character and never really refer to what their looks are again. It's so easy to just block this first part out. And so what you need to do is make these things feel more organic. But it's worthwhile practice to spend time trying to describe what characters look like. And again, that website is a fun one to do because there's no consequence. They're not real people. You're fine. You're fine. So characters can be defined by what they look like. They can also be defined by what they say. This is obvious too, right? We talked about dialogue already. Some of us are getting more confident with our dialogue as we go. It's been fun to look at the dialogue prompt. It feels like you're getting a sense of how to do this. Good on you. But characters talk in different ways. And it's important for us to really make sure that we understand who a character is. And in order to understand who a character is, we need to know what they sound like. Try to find ways to add nuances to your different characters, because people don't sound the same. They don't. They can have different people have different ways of pausing, which I just demonstrated to you, totally on purpose. Are hesitating and things like that. Some people can talk really quickly and kind of run through a lot of stuff, while other people are more exacting and more thoughtful when they go through their thought process. It's a good idea to try to get people that sound a little bit different. Dialogue helps us capture that. There are times in which we have groups of people that all kind of talk and function in the same way. That's okay, but try to do what you can to individualize people. So the words that a character says are important. That's why dialogue's not really something that can be optional in a story. We have to have something because it is a significant and real way for us to know who a character is. So we've got to get that. Now, we can talk about what a character looks like. We can talk about what a character says, but we need to do significant work on what a character does. Now, this isn't necessarily just related to plot, but people function and act in certain ways. They can act and they can react, and all these things lead us to understand who they are. Different people do different things in different situations. People do different things in the same situation. Who is your character? What is your character going to do in a given moment? Is your character going to run or stay? Does your character decide to go to the party and engage with everybody? Is your person not going to go at all? Or if they're convinced that they have to go to the party, they're just going to stay in the corner? Who are they? And what are they going to do? And this is related to the next thing that it talks about in the book, and that is what they think. What does a character think and feel? This is important, right? Especially if we're talking about a protagonist. We're going to get into what this character is actually evaluating. This is especially important in first-person fiction, but it's important in third-person too. What is a character feeling in a given moment? That might be different to what they're doing, right? Because there are times when we do something, but we might feel something differently inside. There might be somebody that I'll meet when I'm walking down the halls at work and say, "Hey, how you doing? It's great to see you." And inside I'm thinking, "I hate you." Or maybe I'm thinking, "Gosh, I remember that time 5 years ago when you did something that I didn't like," if your character holds a grudge. So think about that. Think about the way we function and how different it can be from what's inside, and how you can still manage to explain to me how a character is feeling inside based on how you depict their thought process. Now, the next section of the book, beginning on 333, talks about character and plot. And this is really important because we talked about plot, and some of you said that you are interested in plot, but you're interested more in character. Now, this is where we get to merge those two worlds together. We get to have our character affect what happens in the plot, because characters are not just there for us to describe or observe or understand. They are there to propel things in order. As she says, character is a big part of plot because things that happen are usually happening to the characters. And so characters can influence what happens within the plot. And I love this section because I think it's so important for us to think about. Our characters are not simply in a snow globe that we shake up, that are influenced by what happens around them. They are influencing the things that happen. You can have the same plot that you decide to set up for 10 different characters, and it will move in 10 different ways because each of those people will do things differently. And that gets us to the first one. How does character affect plot? Well, character can take action. A character can do something. This is the most obvious way that character and plot relate to each other. A character does something, and the story is one step closer to completion. It's obvious, but it also is something that I think we overlook sometimes. That we're not just creating something that the characters are only affected by and not influencing. They are influencing it. And so we need to make sure that we have very clear ways of getting that across, that our character can do something, and whatever that is that happens, everything else can follow, right? Character can also be acted upon by others. and create further plot points by reacting. So a character can do something, or a character can react to something that's been done. Maybe both of these things can happen. This is all plot related, but it's plot related in a way that is character driven. This is character driven plot. Something has happened, the character is then responding to it. So if characters can act, as the book says, they can also be acted upon. But that's not all characters do. This is cool. Characters do stuff. They can act, they can react, they can also remember stuff. And so when we get a flashback, make it organic. Make it something that character is literally thinking in that moment. And give us an understanding of why they're thinking about that thing at that moment. This is going to help us understand who the character is and what they can do. So they can remember things. They can imagine things and think about things. These are all crucial elements for us to really understand. It might seem unusual. The book kind of acknowledges that a character can imagine things. It describes it as an often unremarked upon aspect of plot, is that plot points can be created by a character's imagining of things. A fantasy, a daydream, a dream, a projection. But it's true. Characters can do a lot. But we're in control of what they can do. And we've got to make sure. But it's so easy for us to sort of forget that the characters are the ones that can dictate things, even when we're talking about character-driven fiction. And that's why plot becomes intimidating, because it's like, oh my gosh, I have to be the one to figure out everything and all the plot. But once you figure out who your characters are, then the plot is going to continue. Because let's get back to Hamlet. We know what the story of Hamlet is, right? Hamlet's father's been killed. A ghost comes to tell Hamlet's father that, hey, my brother did it. And still Hamlet is not sure what to do because he can't act. Would this move more quickly if we had a character who acted on instinct? If Othello was the one, I'm mixing my Shakespearean plays, forgive me. But if Othello was told by his father's ghost that, hey, my brother, your uncle killed me, that play's over in like 10 pages. Because Othello's like, I will avenge, and then it's it. But that's not who we get. We get the indecisive grad student as our main character. So it goes on for a while. So it's not to say that the plot is just independent of who the characters are. Far from it. It's very important for us to remember that as we go on. So the book also talks about wants and needs, which we've discussed in basic ways. I'd love for you to give me more of an understanding of some of your thoughts on character stuff. I know you like characters. You've told me that a lot. I'd love to get some sense of what your feelings are of how you create characters. You can comment on that below. Give me a sense of how you create characters, how you think about characters, what you do to make sure your characters are interesting. And if you are creating characters that feel more like devices than people, it's something we need to think about. It's something we really need to work on. We've got to develop characters that feel like characters, and that really matters. Now, I didn't give you the specific pages on the reading for this one, and if you didn't read the stories, that's okay, because if you read everything, I think there's really interesting stuff, and you certainly can talk about it below. But I didn't specify it, so I think just the content of the section is okay for me at this point. But reading those stories is always valuable because it gives us applications on how we make these things. The next section, chapter 11, is about beginning your story and how we start things off. And I like to think of the title of a story or a novel and the first line and the first paragraph as being really essential to understanding how we can get our reader engaged. I like to think of it as almost an argument. This is an argument to the reader to stay more interested, to stay more engaged, and to become interested in what it is we're creating. I think by that rationale, every line, every sentence in a story is an argument of some sort, because we are moving from one point to the next point to the next point, and you want to stay engaged. But when you're 100-something pages into a book, you're probably locked in. When you're in the first paragraph, you're not as much. And so I want us to think about how we can really make our first impressions effective. Now, our title is a good way to start with that, but let's not think about titles as much. Let's start off with a good opening, with an introductory opening. The book talks a lot about what makes for a good opening and provides a Forster quote on 307, and that's worthwhile. 367. But I just went And I got a list of the best first lines from novels. I just went to American Book Review, put a link to this up on our Canvas page too. American Book Review put together 100 best first lines from novels. And I'm going to read them. Not all 100. I'll read the first few. And I want you to think about what is happening in these. What makes these so immediately effective? Now, we might say that these are just famous, and so our first instinct is based on what our history says. But here are the top 10. The first one is from Moby Dick. Call Me Ishmael. 2. Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. The third is from Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. A screaming comes across the sky. The fourth is from 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. 5 is Nabokov, Lolita. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins. Next is Anna Karenina from Tolstoy. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. 7 is from Finnegan's Wake, James Joyce. River run, past Eve and Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us commodious vicus of recirculation back to Hoth Castle and environs. George Orwell, 1984. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Charles Dickens, The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. 10. Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man. I am an invisible man. So, what's happening there? What connects those? Is there anything? Because they feel very different, right? There's 10 entirely different thought processes that are going on. 10 different ways of engaging. But all of them, I think, make me wonder what happens next. That seems important, right? In some of them, I'm very, very curious about what happens next. Some of them are statements that are unusual and peculiar and leave me unsure of what's going to happen next. Some are simple introductions, but with an urgency. Call me Ishmael, or I am an invisible man. There's maybe a sense of urgency within this call to identify who the speaker is. There are things that are peculiar. The clocks are striking 13. That's weird. I know that's a book I think many of you have read recently. And so there are these little things that strike us as we go on. So what a good opening should have is something that makes me want to read more, right? It's going to engage the reader. It's going to, as the book says, establish the tone of the piece. It's going to give me a sense. It shouldn't be something that feels completely outside of what happens later. That's not fair. That really strange one from James Joyce, the commodious vicus of recirculation back to Hoth Castle, the opening sentence of Finnegan's Wake, that's spot on for what's going to happen at Finnegan's Wake. I hear there was one scholar somewhere that finished that book, but I don't know. I don't have any proof of that. But in all seriousness, these are books, these are openings that establish what's going on. The screaming that comes across the sky from Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, that's what's going on in that book. That book is surreal, and it's strange, and it's weird, and it starts off with something that represents that. So don't come up with a cool title or a cool opening sentence just because it's cool. You need something that also represents what this world is that you are creating. And remember, when we're coming up with an opening to a story, you can start wherever you want. This is all on you. And I know, great power comes, well, you know. But you're the writer. You're the creator of this universe. You can do whatever you want within this. But you have a choice of where a piece starts. And we've talked about this throughout the semester, but it's something that I think sometimes as writers we take for granted. We don't realize that we really do get to do that, but you do. And what I mean by that is you get to decide where things begin and where they end. They don't have to begin at the beginning. They don't have to begin with somebody waking up asleep and not knowing where they are next. You could start 10 minutes after that, or you can start maybe somewhere earlier than that. I think sometimes there are expectations that we feel as writers about where something is supposed to begin, and they don't need to be what the reality actually is. So figure it out. The book says you can start in the middle. Sure. Right? We can just jump into the middle of the action. Then the characters can remember stuff that we'll need from earlier on. We can do that. Sometimes there's something that is exhilarating about not starting with a very, very logical beginning. Think about even some of those opening sentences that I gave you. There are a few of those that seem like I'm missing something that I'm going to need to know later. And in each of the cases of those novels, you'll get it. You just hold on. Well, maybe not in Finnegan's Wake, but you'll get what you need to know in order to understand the piece, and the story is starting somewhere a little bit later. I think it's a very human instinct for us as writers to feel like we need to give all of the backstory before we really get into something to help our reader through. Don't worry about that. We can provide what we need as we go on. How many things have we enjoyed, novels or movies or whatever else, that it begins with someone being chased, and we don't know why, and we don't know what's going on, but the story unfolds as we go. Or it begins with something very confusing, but clearly evident that a lot of stuff has happened before. That's fine. We can kind of catch up on what's going on. We don't need to be spoon-fed everything all the way around. A lot of stories will begin in the middle of a scene or an action because that's a way to compel us to stay with it and to keep with things as we go through. But you don't have to begin with action. You can begin with thought. You can begin with a character who is in the midst of inaction, as the book says. That's okay. You can create something that is suspenseful. You can do a lot of things. But what's important is what you don't have to do. I think too often writers assume that they have to start with a moment of full introduction of a character. Like, here he is, here's this character, he's waking up, he doesn't know what's going on, he's off to a big day, he's about to eat breakfast. I don't need that. Stories don't have to start with our mornings. Just because our days start with mornings doesn't mean our characters, the things we talk about our characters have to. We can do what we want. And again, that doesn't mean it's easy, but it means that we have to be the ones to kind of dictate how these things turn out. So let's leave it there for characters, and from starting things and with characters from earlier. And I want to hear feedback from you. Try to be quick about getting back to some of your points. I've gone back and I've made comments on some of the other things that you've said in our previous discussions. Please go back and look at my comments, especially when it's something that you've provided, but I asked you a few follow-up questions and I didn't always hear back, so I would love to engage this. I know it's odd to have a conversation on Canvas, and I've not always been super quick in getting in there, but I'm going to try this time, and we'll move on. So let's keep up. Let's make comments about characters and beginnings. I've also set up another thread, it's already up, in which I've asked you to provide opening sentences for novels or short stories that you really like, and provide a little bit of an explanation as to why you like those things. I think that would be cool. As for the rest of your day, it's Halloween. Hopefully you're reading or you're listening to this on Halloween. If not, my costume makes less sense. But enjoy your Halloween. Have a great day. And we'll see you soon. If you are going to send me a story, let's get it in by tomorrow. I know I've talked to a few of you, but if anybody wants to surprise me by sending me something tomorrow or this weekend, I'm good with that. 4 was very manageable for us in our last workshop, and we still got a lot of stories that we need to get through for everybody. So let's make sure we do it, and I will be in touch with more as we go on. Thanks, friends, and have a great day.